September 1941. The world was already burning. But in the north, one city was about to face a fire and frost unlike any other. Leningrad, the proud heart of Soviet culture, birthplace of revolution, home to poets, composers, dreamers, a city of bridges and canals built on the bones of history. And now, surrounded. 3 million souls trapped between the advancing German Army Group North and the frozen expanse of Lake Ladoga, cut off from food, water, medicine, hope. What was meant to last a few weeks would stretch into 872 days of hunger, cold, and unimaginable endurance. But amid all that darkness, people refused to let the flame of humanity die. They wrote, they fought, they composed, and somehow they lived. This is their story. The Siege of Leningrad, not a tale of conquest, but of survival. In early September 1941, the German army stood at the city's doorstep. Their tanks rolled through the outskirts, Pulkovo Heights, MGA, Pushkin. German artillery could already see the golden spires of St. Isaac's Cathedral. Through their binoculars, Hitler's orders were chillingly clear. Leningrad must be erased from the face of the earth. No surrender, no negotiation, only starvation. The Luftwaffe began its bombardment, systematic, precise, merciless. Warehouses burned, food reserves were destroyed, flames rose high enough to turn night into day. Inside the city, panic spread. Families dug trenches in courtyards. Mothers clutched their children, hiding in basements as walls shook around them. By mid-September, the last supply railways were cut. The city was sealed. Ration cards appeared, small rectangles of paper that decided who lived and who died. A worker received 250 grams of bread a day, a child 125. But this bread was barely bread at all. It was sawdust, ground grain husks, cellulose, and the faintest trace of flour. People chewed it slowly, trying to make the taste last longer. Some dissolved it in water, pretending it was soup. And when that ran out, they boiled wallpaper paste for starch, leather belts for protein, anything to keep the body moving.
Still, the city fought back. Teenagers volunteered as firefighters. Women worked in ammunition plants. Elderly men guarded rooftops with rifles older than themselves. Every night, the air raid sirens screamed, and every night, the city refused to surrender. Winter came like a punishment. The Neva River froze solid. Temperatures fell below -30 degrees Celsius. The water pipes froze, the electricity failed, and the dead could no longer be buried. The ground was too hard to dig. People wrapped loved ones in blankets and left them outside their apartments, whispering quiet apologies. They no longer had the strength to cry. Then a miracle of desperation. Lake Ladoga froze over. The Soviets realized that if the ice could hold, trucks could cross. They called it Doroga Жизни, meaning the road of life. Convoys of trucks
sleighs, and drivers, most of them young volunteers, began their perilous journey across the frozen lake. They drove without headlights, guided only by the pale moonlight, praying the ice beneath them would not crack. German aircraft hunted them from above. Bombs shattered the silence, turning night to chaos. Many trucks disappeared under the ice, drivers entombed forever in the frozen deep. But still they drove. Every night, a few more trucks made it through. Each carried sacks of flour, cans of fuel, boxes of medicine, and sometimes letters from the outside world. For many in Leningrad, those letters meant more than food. They were proof that someone remembered them, that they were not forgotten.
In the winter of 1942, the city was a ghost. Trams stood motionless on frozen rails. The sound of footsteps had replaced traffic. Even birds had vanished. Yet amid that silence, music returned. Composer Dmitri Shostakovich, himself trapped in the siege, had written the opening movements of his Seventh Symphony. It was not just a piece of music. It was a message. We are alive. Rehearsals began in February 1942. The Leningrad Radio Orchestra was so weakened that musicians fainted during practice. The conductor, Karl Eliasberg, was carried to rehearsals on a sled. He was too weak to walk, but they kept playing.
On August 9th, 1942, the performance began. The hall was packed with survivors, soldiers, nurses, workers, all bundled in coats and scarves, listening through tears. The music thundered across the city. Through loudspeakers, it was broadcast to every street, even across enemy lines. German soldiers paused their bombardments to listen. For 70 minutes, the guns fell silent. Even they could not ignore the defiance in that sound. It was not victory, but it was triumph. The human spirit, written in notes instead of bullets.
Every generation has its innocence. Leningrad's lost theirs before they learned what childhood was. Thousands were orphaned, wandering streets, searching for food or family. School lessons were held in basements, teachers writing on walls with charcoal, students shivering, their fingers too stiff to hold pencils. Among the most haunting voices was that of Tanya Savicheva, an 11-year-old girl. Her diary held only a few words, names and dates of her dying family members. Zhenya died December 28, 1941. Grandma died January 25, 1942. Mama on May 13th. The Savicheves are dead. Only Tanya is left. Tanya didn't survive the war, but her diary did. It became a symbol of every child who endured those years, of every small hand that held on to hope when everything else was lost.
And still, some children smiled. They drew pictures of the sun, of bread, of green trees, things they barely remembered but dreamed of seeing again. That was their resistance, to keep dreaming. By 1943, the world beyond Leningrad had begun to change. The Red Army's counteroffensive pushed back the German lines, inch by inch.
Artillery thundered across the frozen marshes. The siege, which had seemed eternal, began to fracture. In January 1943, Soviet troops finally broke a narrow land corridor south of Lake Ladoga. For the first time in over a year, trains rolled into the city again, carrying food, fuel, medicine. People cheered, but many were too weak to lift their arms. The full liberation came 1 year later, January 27, 1944, 872 days after it began. When the first soldiers entered the city, they found streets silent and covered in snow. The smell of smoke, hunger, and death still hung in the air. But survivors lined the roads, frail, thin, their faces gaunt, but eyes burning with pride. One woman whispered, "We have lived."
In those years, more than 1 million civilians died. But the city never surrendered. Not once. Factories resumed within weeks. Workers, many missing fingers from frostbite, returned to their machines. Children swept the streets clear of rubble. Choirs sang the 7th Symphony again, this time not as defiance, but as rebirth. After the war, the survivors rarely spoke of what they endured. How could they? How could words describe eating glue for dinner or watching neighbors vanish quietly in the snow? Some couldn't forget. Others tried to. But every winter, when the wind howled through the city, they remembered.
In the decades that followed, Leningrad rebuilt itself, stone by stone, song by song. Monuments rose. The Piskaryovskoye Memorial Cemetery became sacred ground. 500,000 graves, marked not by names, but by the silence of eternity. An inscription there reads, "No one is forgotten. Nothing is forgotten." Each year, survivors place flowers on the frozen road of life. Children of a new era listen to the stories their grandparents once whispered. The music of Shostakovich still echoes through the concert halls. The same melody that once kept a dying city alive now reminds the living what endurance means.
The Siege of Leningrad was more than a battle. It was the edge of human endurance, where suffering met courage and despair met defiance. Against hunger, against cold, against death itself, they refused to break. They had nothing left to fight with except the will to live, and somehow that was enough. When history speaks of heroes, it often remembers soldiers. But the people of Leningrad, the mothers, the workers, the children, were heroes of a different kind. They didn't fight for glory, they fought for tomorrow. And they won. Not by conquering the enemy, but by surviving them.